Commander, it is almost time to begin this week's evaluation. And, puzzled query, what is that telecast you are watching?
It's called professional wrestling. It's the greatest thing Earth ever invented. How can I help you, Margot?
Scanning. You are aware that these men are not actually harming each other. It is a pantomime.
Yep. Wrestling's an art form, not a sport, Margot. It's as much about the characters in the mock fight as it is about the mock fight itself. It's a balance between the appearance of violence mixed with the drama of physical combat, mixed with a touch of comedic slapstick, much like the early works of Aristophanes or even Shakespeare.
Interesting. And what purpose does this physical melodrama serve, Commander? Does it sublimate humanity's brutal instincts?
Mostly, it's cool to see dudes get powerbombed through flaming tables.
Get upset on the internet. You're assaulted.
Hi everybody and welcome to Retro Station 1989. I'm Commander Dan and this is License to Play. It's a review show where we review licensed materials like comic books, movies, TV shows, soft drinks, sometimes fast food. Hell, if it had a license and it was made into a retro game, we see if it has a license to play or not. And this week, we're touching on a subject that I absolutely love. Now, I'm not saying I like this thing or I'm just a fan. No. I love professional wrestling. And if you love pro wrestling like I do, which isn't likely because even during the best of times it's a dwindling marketplace, I think this evaluation is going to be for you. And if you don't love wrestling, still, stay where you are, because we're going to take a real good look at the franchise and license in a broad view, and I'm going to tell you a few things about wrestling so I can educate you if you don't know why we love wrestling. And we're going to talk about my favorite wrestling game for the Nintendo Entertainment System in specific. But first, a little bit about me and wrestling and my grandpa. I've been a fan of wrestling since I was 3 or 4 years old. There are no cute pictures of me and my brother Jeremy with paper belts or videos of us wrestling in our backyard. Because, well, in those days it was mostly Polaroids and no video. But I assure you, my tales about wrestling are truly historic. I'll tell this story first, about my granddad, who loved wrestling before I was even born. He attended a wrestling show in Lansing, Michigan, where a local bad guy and most hated man in the industry, at the time, the original Sheik, who gigged, prodded, and stabbed his way across the nation in a bloody swath during the 60s and 70s, and into his 60s and 70s. And my granddad, at the time, was a true fan, a world-class mark for the good guys. Now, there may be some terms you don't know yet. I'll explain them as they come up. A mark is a person who cheers good guys, boos bad guys, and, well, they're this guy. I'll call him Weepy Beepies.
It's still real to me, damn it! I mean... Thank you.
Easy, man.
And to me, I love wrestling, but damn, I love marks even more. My granddad, huge mark that he is, had seen enough. And after the Sheik cheated his way to another victory, my granddad decided to take it upon himself, as the Sheik was exiting and hitting people on the way out, to try and beat the living crap out of the original Sheik, because he was going after the fans and he was a bad guy. Well, according to the news clipping after, he tried and was beaten down so bad he wanted to file charges against the Sheik for kicking his ass silly in front of a couple hundred people. The cops told him to take it to the prosecutor. And that's where the story gets really funny. The prosecutor of Shiawassee County was named Leo Farhat. That name's important because the original Sheik's name is Ed Farhat, the brother of the prosecutor of Shiawassee County. I assume no charges have been brought to this day, and because Granddad wanted to be Helpy Helperton, he got his ass whooped. And that's why you never jump the fence or try to beat up a wrestler while they're working. At that moment, your fate is sealed. Here's a guy who objected to the NWO forming. He's a real specimen, and there he goes. See? Everyone who tries to assault a wrestler while performing is deserving of a beating. I know from personal experience, okay? I trained with Frankie DeFalco, Sean Priest, and JP from Bruce City Wrestling, and the Beer City Bruiser, who's now in ROH, also showed me some things after having me run the ropes so hard I nearly puked and showing me how to take a back bump. At that moment, I knew that I would have killed to be a manager back in the day, but I'm just too old and broke down now to continue that kind of training. And a very famous wrestler smartened me up to the unwritten rules of wrestling. Chief among them, don't hit a mark, and never let a mark hit the boys and walk away from it. I won't elaborate on which very famous wrestler told me that, but I will say they are a very good brother. That might have gave it away. My wife watched me run the ropes that day, take bumps, and do security that night at the show. On that note, Frankie DeFalco is a gent, and if you're ever near Milwaukee, check out BCW when you can and support your local wrestling groups and your independent wrestlers. That's where my story began with my granddad before I was born and ended up with me trying my hand wrestling. And really, wrestling was always on in our house throughout the years, and I love it.
Oh, yeah! From the time I could throw a bionic elbow, or pretend my flat pillow was a steel chair, I've been a fan of wrestling.
Yeah, to me, wrestling is one of the most zen things in existence. It's the only show where guys are legitimately getting savagely injured by pretending to savagely injure each other. It's magic. Kids, adults, men, women, everybody in every demographic has someone who likes wrestling. I guarantee it. And today,
we're going to talk about Southern wrestling, brother. Oh, yeah. Get your cup of coffee in the big time, yeah.
Paint your face, grab your tights, and get ready, brothers, because we're going to snap into it.
Oh, yeah.
Whew, it's hard not to do that in those sunglasses, people, I swear. But in all seriousness, today's license is based on the venerated wrestling association called the National Wrestling Alliance. In the deep dark past of wrestling, the land was split into territories where men working in the wrestling industry would ply their trade in those territories. Memphis had the bloody and savage style of brawling. Southern wrestling preferred to let the wrestlers' personal issues and stories be told in the ring in an athletic style. And in the Northeast, known basically as New York, were the McMahon family and the WWF. No, I didn't stutter. It was called the Worldwide Wrestling Federation. So before getting the F out, Vince Jr. also got that extra W out as well. We'll talk about him another time. For now, believe me when I say, the National Wrestling Alliance thing, the rest of the territories were under the NWA umbrella. In those days, we're talking about before video games, hell, before VHS. The champion would go from territory to territory and defend the NWA title against the best guy the territory had. Best good guy against the world champ, who's almost always the biggest bad guy, who in the time of our license, Jim Crockett Promotions, then known, but now it is known as World Championship Wrestling, was none other than the Nature Boy.
Silent and profiling.
That'd be Ric Flair. You know, my brother's real dad. You have to watch another video to know what that means.
Query. May I ask a question, Commander?
Sure, what's up?
How does all this pro wrestling endeavor work? As a work of fiction, it is both fascinating and confusing.
Well, I have Dr. Tom Pritchard's book about wrestling, and let's go over a couple terms we're going to be using coming up next to describe wrestling and wrestling-related stuff. Consider this Wrestling 101.
Agreed.
First, if something happens in the ring that's part of the fiction, that's called working. Work or a work. It's part of what's called kayfabe, or the fake world of wrestling. If it's real, it's called a shoot, or shooting, like a shoot fighter. Second, to win at wrestling, you need to pin your opponent, or force them to quit or tap out. Now, this is important because getting pinned, that happens to everyone. But tapping out, that's more humiliating for your opponent. And it tends not to happen all the time. It's kind of a rare thing. There are other ways to win, but don't worry about that now because it's not important. It's not really the fun part of wrestling.
Understood.
Number 2, every match tells a story. Usually 2 guys, a good guy and a bad guy, who don't like each other and are settling their crap with a wrestling contest. That's basically it. But it can be more or less complex than that. Third, good guys are called baby faces, or faces for short, and the bad guys are called heels, derived from the old insult, shit heel. Now, in the old days, the heel was the guy who wasn't quite as talented as the face, so he'd cheat to win or take shortcuts.
That makes sense as well, Commander.
And the last thing, heat. It's the part of the match that's most important. Heat is the crowd reaction to what is happening in the ring. For now, remember that heat gets you over or more established, and when the match reaches a culmination point, the crowd pops.
That clears up most of my questions. Thank you, Commander.
Excellent. Now that we've set a foundation, let's go back in time to the 80s, and when video games started. In the 80s, wrestling got huge and popular due to Hulk Hogan and the WWF, and Ric Flair for everywhere else. The WWF positioned themselves to take over cable and syndication so there wouldn't be territories anymore, just WWF TV and house shows touring the nation. But on television, it would be Saturday Morning Superstars, Saturday night's main event, and everyone else was just put on local television. Contest. It was called Black Monday, and the last holdout with any clout was Jim Crockett Promotions in the NWA. And here he is on Jim Crockett's television showing off WWF product. A merger was being suggested, but what was really being suggested was a takeover. So the NWA and JCP joined forces to form the WCW. Number one, it made it sound more worldwide than it actually was, because I think the world-class wrestling was world-class, but not necessarily anyone from anywhere other than the Midwest, the South, and Portland, Oregon. And the rivalry there was on. WWF featured cartoony characters and outlandish elements, literally, and the WCW kept it closer to an athletic contest and more grounded. This wrestling rivalry caused pro wrestling to thrive on television and in live house shows throughout the 80s. But far across the ocean, in Japan, wrestling was reaching its peak at the same time. And a tour of Japan was a leg on the journey of every wrestler, even Hulk Hogan, even Ric Flair. And Japan created the first wrestling video game. And while we're going to be looking at the World Championship Wrestling license, we need to understand just how Japan influenced wrestling games from the very start. But this part is to tell you more about World Championship Wrestling, or WCW. Like I said, WCW was second in line for a long time, and their roster, well, compared to the WWF and its literal cartoon character portrayals, it was a little flat. Even with the Nature Boy and the Road Warriors, outspoken, flamboyant characters like that, but characters like that were few and far between. While WWF called all of their talent superstars, even this guy, Brooklyn Brawler, or this superstar, Iron Mike Sharp, or Doink, superstar. Anyway, WCW licensed all sorts of things, wrestling magazines, restaurants, and all kinds of stuff to spread the word. But they seemed stuck in the South until WCW started a weekly show called Nitro on cable to battle it out head-to-head with the WWF's Monday evening show, Raw. But that's a story for another time, because it's very involved. However, we're talking about the 80s. After arguably the biggest pay-per-view wrestling event ever, WrestleMania 3, wrestling popped huge. And in 1990, WCW stepped into the video game arena. Officially. Which was great, because now we're going to dip our toes into the icy cold water of wrestling games' early years. And folks, it's bowling shoe ugly. Let's dive in, starting with the first pro wrestling game I ever played, Tag Team Wrestling for the Nintendo Entertainment System. Harken back. The year is 1985. My family had just returned to America from Germany, and my brother and I were with my dad at the mall, at the arcade, Aladdin's Castle. These were a chain of video arcades, and I was ducking through the crowd, playing pinball and playing Pac-Man and Miss Pac-Man, and I saw this machine, Tag Team Wrestling. I never even played it. I just saw it in the arcade, because watching the game, I saw that it wasn't just about moving the guy around the ring, punching, kicking, and slamming. There were spreadsheets, basically, lists of moves. It was daunting and terrible. The only thing that came out of that form of wrestling that was any good was the character Strong Bad. Anyway, it wasn't until a year or so later I played this machine, Mania, which you can get on the Switch right now, the very game, and in most services for consoles like $5, right? And that game ruled my heart. In that game, you played as you. But you were really formatted after the Dynamite Kid, who was in WWF as part of a tag team, but in Japan, he was a dominant force and a hero. And the wrestlers in Mania were based on existing wrestlers and one really terrible racial stereotype, and the champion was called Golden Hulk, who actually looked and wrestled like Bruiser Brody, but also resembled Hulk Hogan to trick stupid kids. The game was tough, but played out like real pro wrestling on TV. Had a wild crowd, had a bunch of cameramen. It was great, but it never came home to the NES or Master System. The sequel, Exciting Hour, I think is what it was called, sort of came home on the Atari 7800, which is more like a demo of gameplay than an actual game. There's just 2 players, or 1 player, and you're fighting yourself, and that's it. 1 match, 1 arena. It was pathetic. Fast forward to 1988, and this machine, the PlayChoice 10, was out, and I'd encountered one. 10 NES games on one machine, where you purchased playtime a quarter at a time, and on that machine, we were living in Virginia at the time, your trusty Commander Dan played Pro Wrestling by Nintendo. When the neighbor kids got an NES, their parents bought 4 games. Mock Rider, a neat battle racing game on a motorcycle. Mickey's Mousecapade, it's a game. We'll get to that one someday soon. Thirdly, Kung Fu, a fun arcade beat-em-up. That's what this one is here. And finally, Pro Wrestling. That game had characters like the WWF had, very flamboyant, and a logical system of play that made the game a treat for wrestling fans. The kid's dad and me and my brother loved wrestling and would fight each other in pro wrestling for hours on the weekends. I'd have been happy just watching them play any video game. I was so addicted, but everyone has their favorites in the pro wrestling game. Mine was the Amazon, because his outlaw choke and stabbing people in the head, but then his apparent self-horror at his bloody cheating ways. When we got an NES, I had a choice of games for my birthday in 1989. I asked for a game that was delayed until 1990, because pro wrestling is a classic, but I wanted a licensed game. And I'd heard that WCW was creating a game. So I got Rampage instead of Pro Wrestling, and I had to wait for real wrestlers in a video game, which lasted about a year.
So, explain what Mark means again?
Sure, Cambot Jr. It's got a couple of meanings. 1, a fan who still believes that some of wrestling's not staged. 2, when you, a fan, really like something and don't care what anyone else thinks. Like me, I'm a mark for Kevin Owens.
Understood, Commander.
It's also a general term for someone who doesn't know what's going on or just attends a show. It can also be derogative, like in the case of...
It's still real to me, damn it! I mean...
That's a total mark. That's all the definitions right there.
Thanks, Commander. What are we evaluating this time?
Well, we're evaluating World Championship Wrestling by FCI for the Nintendo Entertainment System. This is the copy that I picked up for almost nothing at a local show, complete in box. It's a quirky wrestling game for sure, but as you'll see, Japanese wrestling influenced this game at its core. Let's talk really quick about wrestling in video games, but not in the way you'd imagine. I'm talking about wrestlers appearing in non-wrestling titles, and how opinion of wrestlers over in Japan absolutely influences how they're used in video games. Let's start with the first time I recall wondering if it was wrestling or American movies that influenced something in a video game, but here's the first level boss for Double Dragon in the arcade. Yeah, that's Mr. T. Who, by the way, loves his mama.
Mother, there is no other like mother, so treat her right. Mother, I always love her, my mother, so treat her right, treat her right.
Moreover, Andre the Giant is a legend in America and a feared monster in Japan. So much so, he's the boss and sub-bosses of Final Fight in the arcade, called Andore and Andore Jr., or Andre Jr. But it's not just Andre. Hulk Hogan's appearance and attitude had the serial numbers filed off, and he was put straight up in an RPG, Live Alive. Or Live Alive, I don't know how it's pronounced. And multiple fighting games. World Heroes has this guy Muscle Power, but just look at him. That's Hulk Hogan, straight up. That's just Hulk Hogan. And in Dead or Alive 2, he's called Bass Armstrong. and he specifically looks like Hollywood Hogan. But after 1990, it was all about this wrestler, Big Van Vader. Vader appears as Big Bear in Fatal Fury 2. His entrance is lifted and put in Slam Masters, a wrestling-themed fighting game on a guy who looks a lot like him, Alexander the Greater. And that's Cheese Grater. More important, Vader, Hogan, Andre, they are over in every game they appear in, as well as doppelgangers. They are stronger, tougher, and more devastating than most other characters when put up against anyone else in a wrestling game even. And in wrestling games, well, Andre is a creatable character in Fire Pro Wrestling X Premium, but Vader in Fire Pro, all the way from X Premium to Fire Pro Returns, Vader is a win button. In the US, his appearances in video games could best be summed up as this giant butt finisher from In Your House. They treated him like a joke, or at least just a mindless beast. But bear this in mind, because while Andre sold honeycomb sugar cereal to the kids in the US, he was the giant machine in Japan. And in the Japanese version of World Championship Wrestling, he's the super boss of the game. The gameplay for both is identical, the graphics are very similar, except the rosters are different. The Japanese roster is made up of wrestlers from everywhere. In a preview of what Fire Pro would later bring to the world of wrestling video games, beginning with Antonio Inoki, then we go to Giant Baba, Jumbo Tsuruta, Tenryu, Riki Chosu, Akira Maeda, Bruiser Brody, Stan Hansen, Animal and Hawk, the Road Warriors, Vader, and finally Abdullah the Butcher, commonly a foil for the original Sheik. Just wanted to put that out there. It was a pretty stunning roster, and as actually a list of superstars, hence the game's name in Japan, Superstar Pro Wrestling.
And that brings us to World Championship Wrestling. This game I was hungry for. I was waiting months for this game to become available. And the wrestling games, well, they were niche, so any retailer probably got 3 copies of this if they got any copies. And my grandmother took me, after calling all over Lansing for it one night, to the Sears 3 miles away to get it. My grandmother is a hero. And well, let's start the evaluation of the game itself.
We'll start with some basics. The game is based on the 87-89 roster of the World Championship Wrestling Federation, and we have Lex Luger, the Steiner brothers. We got Mike Rotunda as captain of the team gimmick. Think Foxcatcher, basically. Kevin Sullivan, Sting, Ricky Steamboat, the Road Warriors, Dr. Death Steve Williams, Eddie Gilbert, and the super boss is the WCW Master. But look at him. It's actually Giant Machine, a.k.a. Andre the Giant. But since WWF had Andre on a contract, there was no way they could use him in a WCW game. The game itself is what you'd expect in a wrestling game, but it's got tag team mode, a tournament mode, and a tricky but solid game mechanic. After wearing your opponent down with punches and kicks, you engage in a grapple. At this point, you do a Madden-style minigame button press to determine how hard your move is going to hit your opponent. And this is harder than it sounds, and it is a drawback to an otherwise solid game. The fact is, though, the game has so much going for it. A stacked roster, with the ability to change your moveset between matches, but the clear, insanely cool thing that put it beyond anything that WWF was offering at the time, every single character in the roster has a finisher. Not necessarily their correct finisher. Ric Flair does a neck breaker, I believe, instead of the figure 4. But even pro wrestling didn't have that. Until this point, we were so close to a game getting wrestling right that I was willing to accept WCW as the best game out there. Even WWF Superstars in the arcade barely had finishers, which puts this game, in my opinion, above pro wrestling, tag team wrestling, and was my benchmark for closest to pro wrestling on any console. But while I love this game and what it did for wrestling fans on the NES, there is still a question.
Does WCW Wrestling by FCI for the Nintendo Entertainment System have a license to play? Yes. Yes, especially in my case, because I love the license, and given its little quirks about the fighting, once you get into it, it's awesome. It's great. It's one of the favorite things about this game are the moves and the moveset and all of the characters.
Commander, before we end our broadcast, I have a late Christmas present for you. Since we didn't get you anything this year.
Oh, no, that's okay. I'm just glad you all had a good Christmas.
We did, Commander. And so using all that you've taught me about professional wrestling and combing the Retro Station's video files of him, I have used some of the station's resources to recreate a professional wrestler to answer any questions you might have about wrestling.
Come again? What does that mean in dumb space guy language?
I created a hologram of a wrestler to answer 3 questions.
Wow, that's amazing. I can't wait to check that out. But first, and for now, no matter what I've said during this broadcast, or in the past, on any other broadcast, or on my streams at Twitch, which is Retro Station 1989, if you want to watch us stream some retro games or some new games, there I am. A little more relaxed mode in my private quarters. Please head on over there and follow if you like. And also, don't forget to like if you like the video, and subscribe down below if you'd like to know when I'm putting up new videos. Hit the bell. But in the meantime, remember, no matter what I've said, to always, always, always stay retro. Peace.
Get upset on the internet. You're a salt adult. You're a salt adult. Get upset on the internet. You're a salt adult. Throwing out a hissy fit, your views ain't in the millions, and every up and comer is a threat to what you're dealing. And instead of getting better, you just spout up on your Facebook, crying on your Twitter bit about how bad your case look. In case you didn't get it yet, allow me to rephrase it. You cry more than my 4-year-old. I'm actually amazed. Like you couldn't even see the forest for the trees. The writings on the wall, literally there to see. How you getting salted, a culture blowing up, man? I think there was a point where you started growing up, man. Instead of showing up, man, irrationally mad. Don't appropriate impression like the latest fashion fad. It isn't cool or funny to be acting like an edgelord. You alienate friends, push them closer to the edge more. I don't know how to say it anyway to make it clear. If you're the one unhappy, then the problem's in the mirror. Get upset on the internet. You're a salt adult. You're a salt adult. Get upset on the internet. You're a salt adult. The net is a repository for the vast expanses of human knowledge and all the technological advances, and I can't say enough how you gotta be open-minded. Yes, if you're looking for a fight, then you damn well find it. An axe needs grinding, you're not alone. There's a million other nerds who can bitch and moan and groan about how there's a release date delay of the new game. Man, decrease the cliche of your neckbeard. I'm a fear to the intensity of your love for 2 characters. You claim I've got some chemistry and they belong together. Every other ship is toast. Call you Cortez when you're like, burn the balls. Said your ship is sunk and you stunk like the blogger who insisted to you. The review versus Harry Potter versus Julia Roberts. The latter's the victor. You're about to make a victim of some asshole hipster. Get upset on the internet. You're a salt adult. You're a salt adult. Get upset on the internet. You're a salt adult. S-A-L-T. S-A-L-T. You look stupid. A real ass. When they heard your rant, the people laugh. But please stop. Before I'm bored. You're whining like you want to win some award. S-A-L-T. You're a salt adult. 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 You're a salt adult.